Hi everybody, it's Jeff. This will be part 2 of the Canadian armored car machine gun carrier. Okay, this is a Copper State Models kit, and I've been playing around quite a bit with my new editing software and things. I've done a couple things in this video that kind of just a try out. We'll see if you guys like it or not. But I spent quite a bit of time playing with this, so let's get into the video, and be sure in the comments to let me know what you think. Alright, I'll be right back. The first thing I do when I start any kit is wash the parts. A lot of people prefer to use dishwashing detergent, and I generally use isopropyl alcohol. So I trim all the parts, and I have a container here I just keep full of isopropyl, and I put all the parts in it. Sometimes I have to trim the sprues down a little bit so that they fit. I guess I really should get a bigger container, but a couple inches of IPA is generally all it takes. But that makes it to where you get rid of all the mold release and fingerprints and everything, to where you can start putting your kit together. Here's all the parts laying out to dry, and I always mark the container so you know what's in it. So these I'll let dry for a little while. It doesn't take very long with the alcohol, and that'll bring us right up to part 1, or step 1 I should say. Alrighty, be right back guys, thanks. Okay, here's part A6. This will represent the bottom of the engine. This kit does not have a full engine, so that will be the basis to start step 1. I've got it all cut out and trimmed up, and we'll move on to part B15. Part B15 is a cross member that's glued to the back end of A6. It fits very well. It's a real easy job just to glue it on. Okay, doesn't take just a second, and then we'll move on to the next part. Here's the drive shaft, part B16, which will be fitted to the rear of the engine, part A6. Fit is very good. It didn't take very much work at all to clean it up and get it to fit. And there is a slight angle on it. It's keyed so it fits very well. Well, you can't really get it too wrong, but that's the next part there. Okay, moving on. This is part A5, the exhaust pipe and the muffler. Some of the connection points were not in real great spots. They were between the little ribs. So I took a very small square file and just went through and cleaned up the seam lines on that. It didn't take a lot to do, but to make it look good, it's probably something that's really necessary. You can see that there's some places in there where the connecting points were, that I made sure I got all those cleaned out. Okay, here's part A5 all cleaned up. And it's a little tricky. It's not too hard to put it on, but you kind of have to go around some parts and kind of fish it in. It just took me a second to figure out quite how to do it. And there we go. Nothing to it. Okay, this is a 2-cylinder engine, as I recall, and the engine is right underneath the driver's seat. So that's probably one of the reasons Copper State didn't put any, real engine detail on this, because you can't see it, only from the bottom. That fits in there just like that, and then you just glue it in, and that'll complete step 1. Before I actually attached part A5, I decided I'd go ahead and drill that exhaust pipe out. The kit part's just a solid piece. To give it a little more realism, I went ahead and ran a drill bit down in there. Don't recall right off the top of my head just what the size was, but it's pretty easy to figure out. Just takes a second to do, gives it a little more realism. I kind of had to angle the bit a little bit, trying to center it. You can kind of make the drill bit walk back and forth till you get it right in the center. Just got to be real careful. This particular kind of drill bits are just a little bit brittle, and if you're not careful, they'll snap. And okay, so I think we're pretty good on that. So here's part, or should say step 1 completed. All ready to go. I'll be moving on to step 2. Okay. Okay, now we're going to start on the frame on step 2. This is part A11, and it did require a little bit of cleanup. Just basically scraping a seam with the back of your knife is all it took. Just a little detail work there to make sure that everything fits good. Okay, I've got part A11 and A12 all cleaned up, and I've got part B17 there in my hand, and A1 is a cross member. So let's go ahead and get this all assembled the way it needs to go. I'm really sorry. I need to work on framing things a little bit better if I'm going to put the instructions on the screen. I didn't really think about that when I was recording things, but something to work on in the future. Just try and figure out just exactly where I want things to be on the screen. Think more about it instead of just recording it. Okay, gluing part A1 in between part A11 and A12, it's important to get everything nice and square. So I put everything down the mat, and then I'll use the grid lines on the mat to help align things. It's pretty easy to get it square because the A1 is shaped where it doesn't only fits just one way. So just a touch of glue and it's pretty good to go. B17 is a fairly delicate part. It goes to the bottom side of the frame rails, and that's the linkages for the brakes. It has to be in just the right spot, or the linkages won't line up with the wheels correctly. Take your time, get it exactly where it needs to go. It's very well marked, but I had to glue one side and then the other because it's got to be in exactly the right spot, or things don't fit quite right. And there we go. Before the glue had actually had a chance to set, I took part A17, the floor, and I just dry fitted it to the frame just to make sure that everything fit like it's supposed to. Probably a real good thing to do, just to make sure, so that when you go to glue it on later, everything lines up like it's supposed to. It took a little bit of work. There are location pins, but they're very small, so it takes a bit to kind of figure out just exactly where everything goes. Once you get it right, though, you'll know it. Okay. Just leave that just like that for a little while till the glue dries, and step 2 should be good to go. Okay, step 3, it's a simple matter of attaching the frame and the engine components together. The biggest part is to get the 2 tabs on the muffler in the correct location. They've got red circles on the instructions just to remind you. Those do have locating points, but they're fairly small. But it all went together real well. That should complete step 3. Step 4 is the rear springs. It's a very simple matter of trimming A10 and A9 off the sprue. With springs, I really take my time and I clean up the mold lines. I don't think it looks very good to have a spring with a big seam right down the middle of it, so I do a lot of scraping and things, trying to clean them up the best I can. But it's a simple matter of attaching them, and step 4 doesn't take very much. With springs, it's a simple matter of just scraping. I usually use my knife, just going around all the seams. Just be careful because they are a little fragile, but I like to get rid of as many of those seam lines as I possibly can. That way it looks a little more realistic when it's done. So I spend a little bit of time doing this. I think it pays off in the long run. Gluing the springs in place is fairly simple. There are locating marks on the sides of the frames. You just have to make sure that they're facing the right direction, and the rear of the back spring connects to that transfer spring that we added earlier. So the rear of the vehicle actually has 2 cross springs and 1 transverse spring. Fairly simple to add them. Okay, so here's step 4 completed. We've got both the rear springs on in the direction they're supposed to be on. Everything fits really, really nice. And now we can move on to step 5. Part B12 mainly consists of a cross member, the steering box, and a couple of tie rods. It's fairly delicate, but it's pretty easy to install. Just got to get it in the right spots, and it drops right into place. It's not a lot to it. Just got to be careful not to break the little tie rods because they are very delicate. And that should complete step 5. In step 6, we're going to install part A8. which is a front cross member, and also molded to that cross member is the front end of the crankshaft. This will have a place to actually crank start it, since it was built in 1914. There are no electric starts or anything, but it's a simple matter of fitting it. There are locating places on the sides of the frame, getting it right where it goes and gluing it in. There's not a lot to it. Just takes a second or two to line it up exactly where you want it, and that'll complete step 6. Okay. Okay, step 7 is just the fan, part A29. It's very simple to put on. That's about all there is to it, and that finishes step 7. Just a touch of glue, and make sure it's on there nice and straight, and we'll move on to step 8. Step 8, we use part B11, which is the radiator. It's the only part in that step. That's one thing I really like about this. The instructions are real clear and low part count. So just make sure you get it nice and straight. It only goes in one spot, but it is real critical that it goes in the right spot, because the little radiator cap on the top goes up through the floor, and you need to make sure that everything lines up correctly. I didn't actually check it. I didn't think about it when I was doing this. Luckily, it did end up in the right place. But just make sure that you got it nice and straight, and then drop that floor back on it again, just to make sure everything fits okay, and you should not have any problems. That should complete step 8. Step 9, we have a real small radiator hose, part A22. It's a little bit fiddly, but it fits really well once you get it in the right spot. It's just a matter of just getting it just in the right spot and gluing it, and it's good to go. Not terribly difficult. Okay. In step 10, we have to install the steering column, part A13. Everything fits really nice. It's just a matter of getting it in there straight. There again, it's a good idea to drop the floor in to make sure it all fits good, because that shaft has got to go up through a hole in the floor. You just want to make sure it's all nice and straight, and that should be step 10. Okay, in step 11, we have part B13, which is that round hoop at the end of the frame. It's real easy to put on. That's basically the front bumper. It's real important that you get it flat and level to make sure it looks just right. Okay, and that finishes step 11. Very simple. Step 12, we have to add part of the stowage box, which is part B10 to the back. Okay, just a matter of cleaning it up good and making sure that your joints are nice and tight. And it is angled on one side, square on the other. That's part, or step 12. Okay. In step 13, we have a part A7, which will be the top of the storage box. There are some little locating pins. The circles show where they are on the inside, so it's simply a matter of dropping it in there and putting a little bit of glue in it to lock it into place. And that'll complete step 13. In step 14, we have to assemble the rear differential and rear axle, which is part A12 and B7. Okay, it's simple a matter of trimming the parts and making sure the fit is good. I did have an issue with this. There is a slight gap that I had to fix later, but I'll show you here in just a second. Yeah, on the rear axle, there was a gap on each side that I could have filled, but I found some styrene cardstock that was just about the right size, and I just glued those in and then trimmed them off, and they're pretty much invisible now. But just looking, if you've got any cardstock, to see if you can find a piece that fits. If not, maybe you can sand something down. But it was a lot easier to do that than actually fill the seam and then sand it and everything. Lots quicker. It works just fine. Here's the rear axle going in. It's a simple matter of lining up the drive shaft and getting the axle on the springs where they belong. Once you get everything lined up, it's real easy to glue it into place and you're good to go. In step 14, they tell you to attach B3 to B9, but I think it's easier to attach B9 to the frame, to the springs, and get that all in place, and then attach B3. So that's what I'm doing here. B3 is a little fragile, and I just as soon not handle it any more than absolutely necessary. So that has B9 in, and then we'll do B3. Okay, B3 is the tie rod, and it's real delicate. It fits well. The location points are very obvious, but it is very delicate. So get it where it needs to go, and just the tiniest drop of glue, and it should be good to go. And that should complete step 14. Okay, step 15 is just basically a detail view of where the tie rods and the steering linkages and everything fit up, and where the rear drive shaft goes, the rear differential. There's nothing really to add here. It's just clarifying a few things. Step 16 involves the brakes. This only has brakes on the rear, so it's part A3 and A4, and they are handed. You got to make sure you get them on the right side. It's simply a matter of just there's a locating tab. Just make sure the locating tab is in the right place, and they all go together. The little springs should go toward the front, as you can see in the drawing. It's very simple. Just get them on there nice and square, and that's about all there is to it. Okay, let's move on to step 17. Okay, step 17 is brake rods on the right side. B5 is the emergency brake rod, and B2 is the foot brake rod. They fit very well. They're just extremely delicate. It takes a little bit to get them exactly into place. But I found gluing one end and then kind of rotating them down seemed to work pretty well. Just took a little bit of fiddling. But once they're in place, it worked out really well. In step 18, we have B1 and B4 to install on the opposite side. And that will be the brake rods again, just a mirror image of what we've already done. Nothing really to it. Okay, I'll be back in just a minute and I'll show you a couple pictures up to this point. Okay guys, that's going to complete the chassis on the Canadian Armoured machine gun carrier. We'll start on the body, I guess, of the wagon, the tray next. But this is going to be the end of this video. This was a big experiment. What I did was I turned the camera on and I just let it run while I was building. And then later I went through and chopped out the pieces that I thought were interesting and put them in a video. And then I did a voiceover. So it was a lot of work. It was probably about 4 or 5 hours of building condensed down into 30 minutes of video. But I had a lot of fun doing it, and I learned a lot, so that's kind of what counts. So we'll continue on in step 3, or part 3 of this series with the body, and I've got just a couple pictures tagged on the end of this of our progress so far. So have a great day, guys, and we'll see you soon, okay? Bye-bye.